Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Usher, and this is the World of Higher Education podcast. Latin America sometimes flies below the radar in discussions of global higher education. It's too poor to have major players in the world class universities game, but it's too rich to be among the attention getting new high flyers like Vietnam. And even within Latin America, not every country gets the same attention. Colombia also kind of flows below the radar, lacking the size of Mexico or Brazil, not punching above its weight like Chile, and not being stark raving tonto like Venezuela. But Colombia actually is pretty special. Because of the size and shape of its system, it's actually in the middle of a range of debates that are going on across the world at the same time, making it a kind of miniature of the globe as a whole. A move to gratuidad, like in Chile, Colombia is doing that. Constant pressures on quality assurance, given its 207 public and private institutions? Check. Creating new popular universities on the Mexican model? Yep, that's happening too. Working out how to improve student loan repayment? Well, ICETEX, the country's national student loan agency, actually the oldest such agency in the entire world, is working on that too. In short, this is a country whose thinking on higher education deserves a lot more attention than it usually gets. The current government of Colombia, led by left-wing President Gustavo Petro, came to office with big ideas about higher education. But without a majority in Congress, things are not going his way, and it's not clear that he can pay for the higher education utopia that he promised young voters 3 years ago in his election campaign. With me today is Javier Botero, a lead consultant at the World Bank and formerly the Vice Minister of Higher Education in Colombia. He's here to walk us through the latest developments in that country around free tuition, student assistance, and an intriguing case of institutional closure at the University of Antioquia. This was a fun, fast interview, and I enjoyed it a lot. I hope you do too. So without further ado, let's hand things over to Javier. Javier, the last time you were on, we discussed President Petro's ambitious plans for the higher education sector. And one of his goals was to increase enrollment by 500,000 students. 2 years later, have we seen much progress on that promise?
Well, really not as much as one would have expected. Of course, at the very beginning, and I'm sure that I said that in that interview, I thought it was really far too much. That it was something on the clouds, but I think it has gotten something like about 25% of that, and mostly on the technical education in FENA. This huge public institution that offers free technical education. Very little, actually. The students in the private educations have actually decreased, and some state universities have increased, much less than I think the government expected.
So it's as much of a shift of enrollments as it is an addition to enrollments.
That's right. I mean, it is addition in some way, in some sense, because it is true that some students that for whom it was going to be difficult to actually access higher education through this, technical, especially education, or even state universities, they have been able to do that.
Yeah.
So there has been an increase, in the low, economic sector of the society.
Okay, that's good. So
Yeah.
late last year, I think, or maybe it was the year before that, the president signed a law guaranteeing free tuition at Colombian public universities. Now, we have to be careful about that word because, like, for instance, in Chile, you have the word gratuidad, but it only
Yeah.
applies to a certain group of students, right? They certain conditions, including, there's an income cutoff. So what does the Colombian promise about free tuition consist of? Does it really mean free tuition for everyone?
Yeah, of course not. But, the first thing I wanted to say is that this is not actually a policy of this government. It started
Yeah.
actually with the previous government.
Yeah.
And what Petro did was, clarify some points and, let's say, widen the scope of the policy. But still, and I'm glad about that, it's not for everyone. You have to, be in certain group related to income. We call it strato. It's for the
Yeah.
three lowest stratos, and some other groups that have been, I mean, very in trouble for many years, like the indigenous, some
Okay.
Afro-descendants, and all of that. So it is. I mean, it does have, some restrictions, um, but I mean, it's something that Colombia has been working on for now, I think, 6 years.
Right. So it's actually targeted free tuition, but not just on income. As you say, there's some ethnic
Right.
categories that
Yes,
might be, okay, involved as well.
that's
That's
right.
interesting.
And not only ethnic, you all know, of course, that Colombia has gone through a process, I mean, in principle, for peace process.
Yeah.
So people who were involved or victims during all this violence, I mean, they also have, free tuition in public
Oh, okay.
institutions. And
And
there are quite many of them,
so
actually.
all the groups that would be involved in the peace negotiations, they would benefit for, or their children would benefit from this.
Yeah, not only that, I mean, people who declare themselves victims
Ah,
during the
okay.
whole, period of violence in
Sure.
Colombia.
Okay. Interesting. How much does this commitment cost? I mean, so what, like, what's being incurred here? Because I've noticed at the same time there have been some stories in the Colombian press about well, I mean, the government lost the tax reform vote just before Christmas, and
Wow.
that makes it harder to afford a whole bunch of things, I imagine. So, what's the government's financial ability to keep a promise like that?
That's one of the main issues and the big questions. And first of all, because no one really knows how much that costs. In Colombia, the autonomy of universities are very high. So every university determines the tuition, even public ones. And there was, a great heterogeneity on that.
Hmm.
You could find universities that were almost free for, poor students and that charge some tuition depending on income, some that have, a relatively high tuition. So, I mean, it's very
Oh,
difficult.
interesting.
So I mean, it's been really difficult, and probably the case in Chile, that it was. I mean, that was a big issue. How to determine how much, the government or the state would pass to universities from free tuition. So I would say that here is even worse, because the way universities that charge very little, so it wouldn't be unfair to keep them in that level, giving them very little, while those
Yeah.
universities that charge a lot would give much more.
Yeah.
So what they came out at the end is that they work out something like an average, depending on the type of university,
Okay.
research, number of professors, and so on.
So
But
it's a per student subsidy based
it
on the
is.
institution not charging tuition.
That's right.
Oh,
That's the free tuition
got it. Okay.
program. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I remember in Chile, I went down and spoke to them just before they instituted their policy of gratuidad. So just as Madame Bachelet was coming into power, and I remember they asked the question, which made no sense in English. They said, "Where do we set tuition so that tuition can be free?" And I thought that was a Kate, and it makes sense
Yeah,
in the kind of
sure.
situation you're talking about. But
Yeah,
it took
because
me aback at the time.
that's what determine how much money the university get from the
Right.
government per student.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I understand that at the same time that the government is trying to force tuition down, it's also trying to reduce its expenditures on the student loan program, ICETEX.
Yeah.
That seems a little bit like robbing Peter to pay Paul. What's the point of that? What's the logic behind
Yeah.
free tuition but lower student aid?
Yeah. First of all, free tuition, not that it is in Chile.
Yeah.
In Colombia, it's only for state institutions,
Right.
public
Of course.
institutions.
Yeah.
So private institutions don't get free tuition.
Right.
I mean, don't get the tuition that they used to get from students from the government. They
Right.
don't. So ICETEX, which is a student loan or institution, I mean, more than 50 years of experience, is mainly used for students from the private sector, the students that go
Ah,
to private universities. And your point is very valid, and my mm, I would say first answer would be that it is based on ideological positions. That education should be public and free. So I mean, the private sector shouldn't be there. So they say, okay, will give free tuition in the state universities and don't help. I mean, if a student wants or a family wants to send a student to the private institution, just pay for that. So that's why they thought that it was a good idea, to put the money only on the public institutions. Um, but of course, that hasn't helped at all. The whole situation of this target of 500,000 students, because I mean already it's been, the budget of ICETEX has been decreased, and the situation for this year 2025 is actually very critic. You know, not only because of what I just said, but because of what you said, about not having the money. I mean, there is a deficit already.
Hmm.
We are starting the year and we are already in deficit. So I'm sure that there will be some um, more cuts in his effects.
Javier, I remember that early on in his tenure, President Petro seemed to be quite taken by the Mexican model, the Benito Juarez model, popular universities, popular in quotation marks, located in remote locations. And maybe there may be some Venezuelan model he has in mind as well, because
Yeah.
they've opened a lot of new universities too. Has there been much movement on this front in the last 2 years?
Uh, a little bit, I would say, but also let me add that that's not either a new policy. We did this 20 years ago when I was working with the government with what we call the regional centers of higher education. That, the idea was that to bring higher education to the rural and small towns in Colombia, because what you see is that for those who can, students from those zones that can go to a university, to higher education, they have to go to the big cities, and most of them stay there. So it's a way, of actually a brain drain, from the small cities to the big cities, and that's an issue if you really want a more, equity and homogeneous development in a country. So many countries, actually, Venezuela at the time that we did this, that was 2002, 2003. Venezuela was also starting what they call them aldeas universitarias, like small town universities, with the same idea. Mexico did that, and have now, a big program, but there are still many issues with that, and one of them is let's say the academic part. Students from these regions are low. The academic level is relatively low. So you have to actually work a lot, to get them to a level that they actually can start the university program. And the second, as in most things, is funding. How do you fund this? Because of course it would be very hard to expect that the students, pay tuition to private universities in those regions, and those have not been resolved yet.
Okay. So recently, I think it was in September or October, the University of Antioquia in Medellin was the center of some very significant protests, some of which turned a little bit violent, I think.
Yeah.
What sparked those demonstrations? Was that something about specific issues at that institution, or was it about wider issues within higher education in Colombia?
I would say that the both. I mean, wider issues. I mean, issues that are common to most universities, but that in the University of Antioquia, have, let's say, or brought the institution to a more difficult situation. And it's really the funding, the financing of the universities. La Universidad de Antioquia was one of those that actually charged very little tuition. Most students paid, a couple of dollars to study a semester, and they actually increased the numbers or the enrollment very much, and they actually joined, let's say, the policy from 10 to 15 years, of opening different campuses, regional campuses
Hmm.
in small towns at very high cost, and they haven't gotten the money to actually cover all of that. So they have been in a very difficult financial situation. And so, the students just said, okay, what will happen with this university? They started occurring, delays in paying the teachers, especially, What we have here in Colombia, they're our teachers, teachers that are not really faculty, but that they go and teach you class and they paid for that specific hour. So, the university actually get um, delayed on those payments. And so students started, then the unions, join, especially the union of those type of teachers. And actually, it did end up in closing the university. The university is now closed. Um, and now they are discussing how they will actually end the last semester of last year. And
Right.
it seems that they won't be able to do that.
Sorry, did they close because of the protests, or did they close because they couldn't make payroll?
No, I mean both.
Okay.
Because the teachers joined the demonstrations and the strike.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was not possible to have the university open. Actually, they tried, to have some programs running virtually. Getting all what
Yeah.
they had gotten from the pandemic and so on.
Yeah.
But it's been very difficult.
Okay. Well, so the thing is, though, that to regain some stability, both there and the rest of the country, you need a stable government. But the president's never had a majority in Congress, I don't think. He's losing key votes on taxes. He's recently lost a finance minister to a graft scandal, and he's only about 18 months away from the end of his term. Is there any prospect he regains the initiative and can forge a renewed policy in this area, or is this going to be a really long lame duck period?
I think the last is the most probable.
Okay.
Also because I mean, been 3 years, not even. No, it's been less than 3 years, and there have been three ministers, and it looks like there will be another change in the ministry. So there is no continuity, and even in the policies, and the situation in the political situation is not getting better; it is getting worse. And and approaching the elections next year, it will be even worse. The opposition, polarizes even more. And President Petro is not one of those that in those situations try to
Right.
to calm down. But I mean, he just put gasoline on the fire.
Straight ahead.
Yeah. So I'm sure that it will be very difficult. Maybe almost 2 years ago they tried to pass a law, a general, what we call the statutory law on education. They couldn't. Now the minister was talking about, passing a law just to change the funding model, which I must say is very archaic. It's terrible. It doesn't incentivize universities to do anything. Now with free tuition a little bit to admit the student, but that's not really a good solution.
Yeah.
Because then, as we see in Antioquia, what this does is it gets the problem even worse.
Right.
So no, I don't think that much will happen in this 20 or 22 months that we have left.
Right. So we're already seeing the 2026 presidential elections start to take shape. Are any of the leading candidates likely to pursue policies in higher education which are radically different from those of the current government? I mean, you mentioned that to a large extent, what President Petro is doing is a continuation of the previous government. So do we expect continuity or change as we head towards those elections?
What I would say is that there will be very different positions in the candidates. Because I mean, what you just said is not totally true. I mean, he took the free tuition and kept it, but there are many things behind that and additional to that. So I do expect that some candidates, I mean, we'll have for sure Alejandro Gaviria, who was the first minister of Petro just for a few months, and I'm sure that he's already a pre-candidate. So I mean, the higher education issue, is very popular, because I mean, you get the students to vote. Why you don't get the primary and secondary students to vote. So candidates don't talk so much about the education in primary and secondary education, but they do talk about higher education. And there are big issues, I mean, higher education in Colombia needs a deep reform, going far beyond the funding. Also, the funding is an important issue, but it goes much deeper than that. Um, so I'm sure that it will be an issue, and I expect that some candidates will put on the table good proposals. And of course, what we'll have to wait and see is whether what happened with the proposals and who gets elected. Political situation in Colombia, as in many parts of the world, is very polarized and
Hmm.
on polarized environments. Not always the best choices get into office.
Right. Well, Javier Botero, thank you so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And it just remains for me to thank our excellent producers, Tiffany McLennan and Sam Pufek, and you, our viewers, listeners, and readers, for joining in. If you have any questions or comments about today's episode, please don't hesitate to get in touch at podcast@higheredstrategy.com. Don't forget to join our YouTube channel. Never miss an episode of The World of Higher Education. Join us in 1 week's time when our guest will be freelance writer Ben Wildavsky. He and I are going to be chatting about the 15th anniversary of his influential book, The Great Brain Race. Bye for now.